What is data-driven content?
Data-driven content is a piece of content that can use data, usually in real time or near real time, to create graphics. So computer graphics are, computational, and so being computational means that they can take different kinds of input. It's a different way of thinking about design, where instead of designing the end result as it is, you're designing a system that can be driven by things. I actually think of it as making a visual instrument, and instead of having, a person playing the keys of that instrument, the data plays the keys.
Why is it important to have data-driven content?
Well, I think data is increasingly a very important part of life, business, and culture, and I think that being able to represent it and to make it meaningful or expose and showcase the meaning of that data is part of participating in culture today.
Do you have any use cases that show the best of how dynamic spaces can be?
Many of the use cases where I think our work really shines are ones where people want to tell the story of, any story. Our background as a company is in museums and interpretive installations, and I think that actually is part of why we've been so successful, is because we're able to think of all of our interventions in connection to story and in connection to a cultural expression. So when a brand wants to tell their story, we're able to do that in a compelling way, and it's one thing to make a state-of-the-art AV installation, to bring the technology into the space. That does enliven the space in one way, but you still really have to have the backbone of the content and of the story. And it's easy for a story that's based on traditional messaging, where again it's the brand or the institution talking at the audience. It's easy for that to get stale, and so we find it to be much more engaging and much more dynamic to have content that can be more variable, that can change over time, that can be interactive, and that can feel like it's more immediate and of the moment. And so that works for a lot of situations, including retail, as you're saying.
How articulate are clients when it comes to the design brief?
The fun thing about doing client work is that every client is completely different. What they need to hear to understand what we're offering or to understand the value of the design is different with every client. Some clients come to us and they want us to be the expert, and they don't really have that much of a point of reference for what they do, what we do, but they understand that we can do something special for them. Whereas other clients, they are very technologically savvy and they want to understand how we're using technology in an innovative way. And so I think that we have to address really different needs with each client. It's different every time.
Which client challenges stand out for you?
We usually get fairly intangible and high-level client goals. So to foster pride in employees, or to create visibility in a new headquarters, or to create awareness within employees of the company. That's actually a high-level brief that we've engaged with a few times, and so eBay is an example of that. But we have a new client who needs the same thing. They want all of their employees to have a sense of pride and an awareness of how big the company is and what it does, and not just to be siloed within their department, which can happen very easily.
When clients come to you, how do they start out their design journey?
Well, I think that we often are brought in, when there's an event within the company. The work that we do is, it has a long lifespan. It's a significant investment, and so usually there's some kind of event that triggers the interest of the company in making that investment. And so sometimes that's because they want a new headquarters, and there's usually a large shift in the narrative in a company that also accompanies starting a new headquarters or establishing a new headquarters. The work becomes about these interesting and abstract stories about the future of the company and their core identity, and so we really need to address the stakeholders and make sure that we're understanding on across these different teams and from the CEO down what the vision is for the new company and how we're part of expressing that. So that's a very common inflection point at which we'll come in and engage with the client. Another one might be, for eBay, they were separating from PayPal. And so it was important for them to help to establish their own identity and to reestablish their brand going into the future. And so helping to tell their story to themselves was part of what we were doing.
Are we reaching a point where architects now are much more sympathetic to media and architecture?
I think that there is a lot more enthusiasm within the architecture community for media and media architecture. It's not evenly distributed. It's interesting. I actually worked in media for event production for 3 years, and then I went back to grad school and I studied architecture. And most of my teachers were pretty indifferent to the idea. They have other concerns, like the discourse of architecture, that's just one small topic within it. But I think that architects understand that the digital experience is part of culture, and it's part of social design, and so when they're thinking about spaces and social spaces, it makes sense to incorporate digital. So we have started to get a lot more interest, I think, like when we speak with architects and do a capabilities presentation for an architecture firm. I think they're much more perceptive. They have better questions. Architects are the original generalists, I think, in terms of design, and so it's not outside their purview to engage with the technology. I think they just haven't seen it as a mandate, but things are changing.
What role do sensors play?
We often think of our installations. One of the qualities that we think about is how interactive or how reactive it might be. We might have an installation where people are not intended to interact with it, or we might have one where people are intended to touch it. We might be planning to have multiple people having a multi-touch experience, and so we are often thinking across that range. And the introduction of new sensor technology is really exciting for us because we see it as enabling us to have more of a design range, more of an expressive range within that scale of interactivity. And we see there being many opportunities for interactivity, or at least reactivity on the side of the media before anyone even comes up and touches a screen. If something can respond to presence, or if a space is busy versus almost empty, we want to be able to respond to those conditions. We see those as being social conditions, and it's more poetic or more powerful when the content can respond to that.
We saw an example of what sensor can do in train stations. So the tube rolls in, example of a woman's hair ruffling to match the movement of the train coming through the station. I thought it was quite clever.
Right, and it's interesting. I think there's something really pleasant about seeing a piece of content react and to be part of the space instead of just being, just kind of talking at the space. There's an indifference to content that isn't part of its environment in that way, and I think that there actually is a different emotional quality to content that is reactive and is more present.
Information is most useful when it's understood.
Right, it's easy to forget that. So that's a Muriel Cooper quote. Information is only useful when it can be understood. I have so much admiration for her because I think that she was very much a visionary, and I think that she approached her work with a lot of rigor, but she understood that data needs to be visualized, that there's a lot of value in visualizing it in the way that people think about it. She understood that computation can allow us to represent data in the ways that humans think about it, which is, if you take a minute, like that's quite an interesting idea. Instead of representing data in the way that is easiest for the computer to represent it, or the easiest to record, or something like that. So her thinking is revolutionary. I think that it's in this moment right now where people do want to represent data more, where there's excitement around data visualization. I think sometimes people get carried away and then they make visualizations that are really cool, but maybe don't actually help people have insight, or don't actually tell the right story. Sometimes people make things that are overly complex, and that I actually consider that to be alienating sometimes. We need to stay human-centered in our design, especially information design. So I think that what is really inspiring to me as a designer is to be able to take information, make it understandable, but also make it very aesthetic. And sometimes that, there's a lot of room for abstraction and making, something that is unique, but we're still celebrating the data itself and making it available.
How important is presence?
if it weren't for presence, we would just be brains floating in a jar. I think that I am really interested in the idea of presence, especially right now in this time when people are talking about artificial intelligence, and I think there's this idea that as humans we don't necessarily need our bodies, or the body is secondary to the mind, or something like that. There's a lot of philosophical. It's very philosophical. But I think that as humans, presence is central to our human experience. I think that it's central to our satisfaction. I think it's central to our sense of connection, and I think that people take that for granted. And so part of my attraction to working in spaces is because of presence and what that allows for. Think about any musician that you like. If I, let's say I love Drake, right? So I can listen to Drake's music for free, right? But I will pay hundreds of dollars to be with Drake at a concert and to have that experience and to share that with other people in the same space. I think we can point to so many examples of the value of presence, and but people will also still forget about it.
Surely there's nothing more powerful than delivering targeted information to an individual.
It's true. It's really true. And I think that there's, mobile technology and like individualization that allows, and the targeting that allows is one way to do that. But it can be kind of, intrusive. Whereas I feel like within a space, it's less intrusive because it's, your device is so personal. And whereas on the wall, that's less personal. And so it can be very situational and very focused, but it's kind of not stepping over that boundary.
What do you feel the next breakthrough is going to be in design?
Well, I love computer graphics, and so I'm just thrilled to think about how much faster everything is going to get, and the possibilities for real-time graphics. I think that it's going to become much more normalized to design graphics for real time, and I'm excited to see design pipelines and creative pipelines go in that way and support that work.